this time, but this is the follow-on class from the first class we did this morning where we talked about biomechanics, and this one I'm going to talk mostly about how I want to apply the biomechanics to the fight. I'm going to first start by apologizing. This slideshow is not going to be as good as the last one because this is really more of cutting and pasting my giant rambling blurb writing on this topic. It's not going to have as many images because these are hard things to get pictures of individually because I'm trying to show relative distance between myself and other opponents and not having other opponents because, you know, hey, we're all in quarantine and I can't really take a picture of myself from the outside very well. So I'm going to, again, maybe share my screen. I don't know. Hang on. I want to move some stuff around. I don't like the way this works. Hang on. Go where I want you to go. Do the thing. All right, so we're going to share that screen. Yes, do the thing that I told you. Okay. So, again, this is still from the same slide handout. I put the thing in the original event. I don't know if you can get to it that way, but if for any reason anybody has an issue getting to it, feel free to either poke me through Facebook or go to the SCA-SMAC Talk group. I have an actual page on Facebook for this topic. So all of that stuff will be shared there. So we're going to talk real quick about measure and distance, which is the first component. Now, we talk about measure a lot when we talk about sword fighting. If you read any period manual, everybody's constantly talking about measure. And in the SCA, especially in the armored community, there are measured discussions about measure, but I feel like the vocabulary we use a lot is either to period, to where you have to learn Italian or French or German to say the words, and then you have to define terms and it gets problematic, or they're so nebulous in definition as to be worthless. And I'm going to call out specifically the SCA old hack that everybody brings out of A, B, and C range. I'll get into why I think those terms are, I'm not going to be super polite about this. I'm going to tell you my personal opinion. I think those terms are garbage, and I'm going to go into explaining why. I'm also going to try to offer some simple terms that hopefully can change the way we have that conversation. But first, let's talk about what measure is. Measure in total, to me, and based upon my understanding of everything in the period manuals and my experience as a combatant, both professionally and recreationally, is it's made up of distance, timing, and pace. Those are the three core components of measure. The first one is fairly easy to talk about with the right terminology. The second one is more esoteric, and the third one is something you kind of have to experience. So let's talk first about measure. Anytime we have a conversation about measure in SCA armored combat, everybody always brings out the ABC conversation. Be in A range, B range, or C range. This is why I hate those terms. What does A mean? Does it mean right up nose to nose, face to face, crotch to crotch? Or does it mean way the hell out there? B meaning the middle, C meaning close, A meaning, you know, those terms are used interchangeably. I've been shown and trained with both inside the same kingdom, principality, and group. So what terms I'm going to use are the following. The terms I'm going to recommend that we use for this discussion. And those are reach and range. These sound like fairly simple concepts, and they are, and I like them because they have an intrinsic definition. Reach is the distance at which, without an action to change distance, i.e. no piece of footwork, stepping in or stepping out, and your opponent not changing the distance. Reach is the distance at which you can place your weapon upon your opponent, be it your fist, a dagger, a sword, a polearm, or 9-foot spear. That distance where you don't have to move, but you can touch or strike your opponent. That is reach. Okay? Range is one action, one change of distance outside of reach, so past the distance where I can touch you, up until the end of visual range. If I can see you, you are in range. We are actively fighting whether we can touch each other or not. That is range. Now, is reach a set distance? Absolutely not. Is reach the same for everyone? Absolutely not. I have fought His Grace Edmund. This man has the reach of an orangutan with a telephone pole. Me, not so much. Also, reach and range also apply to ranged weapons, crossbows, ballistas. The operational reach of those is where they can comfortably shoot you. Range is if I can see a crossbowman pointing at me, he's threatening me because we're in range, right? I'm going to use the terms reach and range throughout this discussion. What I need you to understand is from my approach to this, if you are in reach and you are not actively attempting to strike, damage, or score against your opponent, you are doing it wrong. Do not be in reach without competing in action. This is one of the reasons I hate ABC's conversations. Not all, but a lot of SCA armored combatants, if you critically watch them fight, either in live or in video review, most of those fights occur in reach. When people stand at range, they do nothing. They march into weapons reach and are at a place where they can hit each other, and then they try to work timing and pace. They don't do a lot of distance control. I am always going to advocate, again, this realizing that this comes from the fact that I'm a buckler fighter and I don't have a passive defense. Do not stand in reach. If you're in reach and not actively doing something, you're doing this wrong, from my opinion. All right. So reach is not static and reach is not equal. My reach and your reach are not going to be the same thing. So it is not simply a rock, paper, scissors kind of thing. You have to be able to make a transition from range into reach. And the point that you should get comfortable and learn fighting at is not only the transition and tipping point between your range and reach, but you have to develop the skill to assess and judge your opponent's reach. Just because I know where my tipping point is doesn't mean I go to my tipping point and that's where I fight, because my tipping point is a foot into His Grace Edmund's range or reach. So I have to fight at the tipping point of his range and reach. Same thing if I'm fighting Sir Vargas when he has a 7-foot pole armor, Sir Droost, or his Grace Brennan from the East with a spear. Don't do that. Don't stand inside his reach, because that's what dead fighters do. All right? Timing is a difficult thing to discuss because it really has two core components. It has scale, all right? And it also has placement. Time scales vary upon which part of the system you're moving. Your perception, your upper body, or your lower body. There are 3 tiers of timing scopes, all right? You will never be able to move your lower body at a speed I can't perceive. You can trick me, you can lie to me, but you can't do it faster than I can perceive it. You can also never move your lower body at a faster pace than my upper body can move. Your lower body, or as George Silver would call it, time of the foot, is the slowest time. You will take the most increment of time to change distance by changing your position by stepping in and out than you will by changing your position by reaching. Does that make sense? Everybody got that? Right. So think of it kind of as a rock, paper, scissors kind of equation. Eye, or perception, is always going to beat hands. You're always going to be able to perceive hand motion faster than it can complete. You can be tricked by it. It can be a lie, and good fighters lie. All right? But I'm always going to see your hands move before they can complete. And I'm always going to be able to move my hands faster than your feet. So there's kind of like a rock, paper, scissors tree to that. The next portion of that is timing to target. All right. If you are doing active defense, you have to move your timing to interfere with your opponent's timing. For an example, if an opponent throws a shot at me and I am stupid enough to be inside of reach, I've got to out-time their shot. Does that make sense? Their hand is moving at this. I have to cover it with this. I can cover that by moving out with foot, but my foot's not going to beat their hand. What I have to hope is that my perception beats their hand. If I perceive it before the hand completes it, I can do some action to interrupt the hand. So I can't trust my foot to beat the hand, but I can trust my eye and my hand to interfere with the hand. Does that make sense? It's really, it's a hard thing to talk about without practical examples and show in practice, but that's basically timing. The next part is pace. And this is where I think a lot of people get confused. Pace is the rate at which actions take place. Everyone thinks that in order to control pace, they have to be active. That high activity controls pace through doing pressure, through being just outside of reach, putting pressure into that, making you react. That's me controlling pace. And that's true, but that's not all. I can also control pace through inactivity by being outside of reach, being well into your range where you can't do anything but make funny faces at me because you cannot strike me. If I just go completely static and wait, that's a pace control. Because remember the economy of violence. Don't spend calories you don't need to spend. So if I'm standing well out of reach and I'm static and doing nothing, it looks like I'm taking a nap and staring into the middle distance and thinking about dandelions, and you're jumping around and doing jumping jacks, I don't really care because you're not a threat to me, but you're burning calories. So as your calorie intake goes up, the rate also increases as your reserves deplete, and then your actions begin to slow, so then I'm controlling pace. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So the one we have the most control of, and the one that we have to have control of first and foremost, is we have to control distance. You can have all the timing and all the pace control you want, but if you give up your control of distance, it just becomes a crapshoot. It becomes percentages, and that's a bad way to fight. One of the mental games we don't do in SCA Armored is we don't approach these fights as life and death, and nor do I think we should. It is a game of chess. It is a game of who lies better and who can trick each other. Okay, does all of that make sense to everybody? Everybody's got that? All right, so we're going to move on to the next portion of this. Let's talk a little bit about perception. We didn't really talk about perception a whole lot in the first portion, but I'm going to talk about it now. And the thing I want you to realize is that the human mind has many layers. It's kind of like an onion or a cake. We like to think that we are unique in the animal kingdom, and to a certain extent we are. We give ourselves a lot of credit, but we also give ourselves too much credit sometimes. So let's talk about how many brains you actually have. The way I'm going to approach this is that you have 3 minds. All right, you have 3 levels of processing power. So the 3 minds that we've got, oh, let me back up. I messed that up. Go back. Okay, so there we are. You have 3 basic brains. You have your lizard brain, you have your monkey brain, and you have your sentient brain. Your lizard brain, and I'm going to get really esoteric here and very colloquial and vernacular. I'm not speaking from a scientific standpoint. I realize this isn't how it actually works, but this is just a way to think about it. Your lizard brain is your brainstem. It is the chorus part of your brain. It is the part that makes your heart go thump, 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 and makes the bellows of your lungs work and does all the things that need to happen. It also is the part of your brain that lets you stand upright, and you teach it how to walk. So when you walk across a room, you don't think, like we talked before in biomechanics, I need to contract this muscle group while I do a concentric action here and eccentric action there, all of those things. You're not doing that on a conscious level. That's your lizard running that, okay? Your monkey is really the brain that does all your semi-automatic functions, like how you drive a car. When you learn to drive a car, you way oversteer, way overcorrect because you're trying to think about it. My sentient brain goes, I got to go left, I go too far, now I got to go right. But when you learn how to do that, the monkey takes over and it goes, I know this, I got this, let me do this, let me do this, let me do this. That's how you're able to drive 4 hours on an interstate and then go, wait, where am I going? Okay, that's the monkey. So lizard is the most basic brain that is your instinctive responses. Monkey is your trained responses, your learning how to do things, your habitual training. It's what we call muscle memory. Muscle memory is not actually remembrance in your muscles. It's teaching your monkey brain, your kind of habitual brain, how to do a thing. That's where your learned reflexes come from. Your sentient brain is your plotting brain, is your visualization and pre-visualization brain. It's the liar. It's the one that you have to lie with and through. So when I take a guard and I do a certain thing, I'm hoping that your sentient is smart enough to see the thing I'm doing and figure it out and try to tell the monkey to do a different thing because my monkey's doing this other thing that your monkey doesn't know, but my sentient brain, that's the liar. Okay, does that make sense? That gets really jumbled. I'm sorry, but there you go. That's the gist of that. So, what happened? No, my slide screwed up. Hang on. Too many minds. Okay, so the way I want you to think about this is we have to work to control reach versus range. We have to be able to figure out our timing versus our opponent's timing. And we have to learn how to control pace. Now we're going to go back and we're going to talk about the steps we talked about in part 1 as they apply to reach and range and transitions. Now this is where I want to do a little bit of participatory feedback with you guys. So I'm going to turn this slideshow off and try to get as big a camera as I can. So everybody's here. Feel free to unmute your mics. I want to hear from everybody on this. So those of you who covered the steps, were here when we covered the steps. We talked about passing steps, gathering steps, and expansion steps. Like we talked about as far as the passing step, think of it as just your human stride. It's just a pause. Your neutral stance is a pause in your walk, and a passing step is continuing the walk, right? And a gathering step is kind of a hop skip. And your expansion is an accordion step. Which one of those do you think covers the best transition from range into reach?
Would that depend on the situation?
To an extent, yes, but from a mechanical standpoint, from a biomechanic standpoint, which one do you think does that transition from range into reach most efficiently?
That'd be the first one, right? Just pure mechanics.
The passing step. The passing step is the least caloric expensive. It is the one we are built best mechanically as a system of levers and pulleys to do. And it also has the most stable exchange of distance. It is the quickest and it is the smoothest. All of the other steps have multiple phases. A gathering step, you have phase 1, you gather, phase 2, you expand. An expansion step has phase 1, you expand, phase 2, you close. A passing step is you go from this to this. It's a single phase step, okay? The trick is, in SCA Armored especially, too often people are married to a specific shot mechanic that requires a fixed foot position and a fixed upper body's position. You need to be able to time and place your shots equal with the steps, and don't separate these items into they're different tiers on the same Sunday, if that makes sense. So we talked about
Fluid,
perception.
not broken
Right.
down, broken step.
So we talked about perception, hand, foot. If you perceive a thing, you move your hands, you move your feet, all of these different speed tiers. You will never be able to step faster than someone can perceive, but you can use that step and their perception processing to hide another action. You understand what I'm saying? So if I'm at range and I want to cover a hand motion, I can step and then hand. But ideally what you want to be able to do, from my point of view, again, this is what I'm going to tell you to practice, is stepping and shooting concurrently. You can cover your foot action with hand. All right? When you begin a hand action, you're processing at hand. If you can slide a foot into the hand, hopefully the hand completes right as the foot does. You understand? That's where you have to develop your timing. This is not something I can just, okay, do these 6 motions and then you're done. You have to learn how your body does this and practice this a lot. And this is what we should be dealing with more in practicing, and especially in our PEL work. When you're doing PEL work or any training activity, you need to be not singling out or siloing a speed and not siloing an action. Don't stand in front of your PEL at reach and get really good at throwing a flat snap with no foot action, because that's not how you need to actively fight. Watch people who train a specific thing in front of their PEL and then watch them fight, and watch those things not happen ever again. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Everybody got that? All right.
Yep. Can I disagree with the statement that the passing step is the best for entering measure?
I didn't say it was the best for entering measure. I said it was the best mechanical step.
Okay.
From a biomechanical standpoint, it's the best step. It's not always the best one to enter or exit measure.
Okay.
Very often, just a slide back or just a gather can change your reach. If you're right at the edge of the cusp of reach to range, and you make an action into to bring your reach to bear, and all I do is accordion my foot in, I've stepped out of your reach, I'm out of measure, your action goes by, and then I can re-enter. It's not always the fastest. What I'm saying is that it's biomechanically the simplest.
Agreed with that, yes.
Yeah.
But the problem with the passing step, and why most period manuscripts promote either the accordion or the gather that you mentioned, is because that passing step is a much longer tempo than either half of, yes, you're right, it is 2 phases to do either a gather or an accordion step. But that middle phase lets you stop, checkpoint, and redirect if something happens that you didn't want. And
right.
the passing step is a big tempo that...
and it's a commitment.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
big commitment to a big change. And that's true.
And a good fighter will exploit that.
That's very true. And again, I'm approaching this from an armored combat perspective. And this is where, in my opinion, again, in my understanding, where we begin to differ greatly, or not greatly, but differ a bit in the application between period sword fighting manuals and their intent and their goal, and the SCA armored, for lack of a better term, combat game. In real sword fighting and most period manuals, they were built for people who are actually fighting, or playing a different set of combat games, where the victory condition or the scoring condition was dramatically different. In an actual fencing, rapier, or backsword competition between 2 human beings in light armor to heavy armor with edge-sharp weapons, my victory condition is if I get that much of my sword into or on you, I win. So that's where that how far into reach I have to get is a much different equation than I'm going to hit you with a giant piece of grass. I've got to get further in. Overall, are there instances where that's not true? Sure. You got your thrust and your tip, but we don't really, in armored, we don't deal with tip cuts. Everything we're doing has to be a percussive cut. And that changes a little bit. Some of the measure math, it changes the arc of scope between what is reach and what isn't reach. Because reach is not just can I lay a stick on you, it's can I lay a stick on you effectively for SCA armored combat game. That makes sense, Desco?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see where I see a little bit more use out of the passing step for armored versus, I'm not saying that the gathering step and the expansion step have no place or purpose in the game of armored combat. I'm just saying that I think that being able to transition into and out of range at that deeper step is more effective in armored.
Okay.
I'm open for disagreement.
Well, and you know, you are definitely approaching this from a SCA armored heavy perspective. Let's use that word. I've read manuals from like Fiore, who is definitely doing armored combat, to all the way up through the fencing masters of the 17th century who don't, but they all promote this concept of tempo, which is big steps take longer.
Yes.
Are exploitable. And someone like that guy, Keith, who if you take a big step into his measure, he's going to poke you with the tip. So,
absolutely.
So that percussive section of the sword isn't going to matter. And definitely the armored combat sections of Fiore do talk about the usefulness of a specific range of the sword.
Yeah, the forte.
No, not just not the whole forte. I'm like that last tip is less useful. There's the percussive maximum. They do definitely name that. Not that name. They use a different word, but
yeah, I can never remember the damn words because they're in a different language.
Whatever. But just the most percussive part of the sword being about 50% out to about 75% out, because you lose a lot of power. They do talk about power in the armored sections.
And like also a lot of stuff that I'm folding into this theory, like you weren't here for the first port. I don't know if you were. Nope. I didn't remember seeing you in the first port. But again, a lot of this background of the way that I'm structuring this is coming from stuff I taught in the U.S. Army, where we tried to distill every martial art known to man into a thing I could teach an Iowa farm kid the basics of in 3-day workshops, as well as I'm also folding in a lot of later 19th century military saber manuals, like infantry sword from the British war colleges and other stuff. And you're right about Fiore, but if you look at Fiore too, especially like, I'm always going to talk about George because I love my silver, even though he's a jingoistic, xenophobic prick. I still like the way the guy writes a lot, some of the stuff. Most sword fighting once you get into armor, it becomes less about a weapon and more about how do I close to the grapple to stab you in the armpit, eye, or groin, or stomp you. So that's where we lose a lot of the period manual, because a lot of it's get the bind, do the disarm, go to the ground. Fiore, maybe not so much as others, but there's a lot of that.
Oh, he absolutely does, especially in armor, because the sword is basically useless against armor.
Yeah, most fencing manuals that were part of fencing schools, especially from like the 13th, from I-33 up until probably mid-13th, mid-14th century, are expected to be fought against lightly armored or unarmored opponents, people in street clothes. They're kind of like dueling manuals or whatever. Because a sword really is a weapon you use against peasants or gentlemen. You're not using a sword in warfare. In warfare, you're using large mass troops and whatever you can run people over with. But in tournament combat, as it existed, is one thing, but I'm going to kill you, war fighting is a different thing. So I'm kind of approaching it from a war fighter perspective with attorney eyeball. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So
I want to throw in something on that real quick here. Since when we talk about manuals and we talk about armored combat and then we talk about the SCA, one of the reasons why things, in my opinion, don't translate particularly well to the SCA is that there were no systems of armored combat that one and done was a thing.
Correct. We don't go to the grapple, we don't go to submission, which is why guys like HMB and ACL and all the other steel leagues are doing a much more faithful adaptation of period tournament.
But it might, a period tourney perhaps. But what I'm saying is that when you talk about one and done in an armored situation, you are talking about very, very brief moments of history where the sword was ahead of the armor. They did occur in very brief periods, so there probably were combats where some of this was relevant if you hit hard enough with that really good top end sword that was just, you know, forged out of some new metallurgy that's become popular. You can actually cut through the armor and take him out in a single shot. But most of the time, armor was ahead of weapons, and you couldn't take someone with one shot.
It's a progression.
So
when you get a weapon that kills people
of armored combat to the SCA-Combat, there's not a single manual for armored combat that was designed, I hit you once and the fight's over.
I agree completely. And there also is no period manual. And back me up on this, Desco, because you've read more of these books closely than I have. My understanding of it is a journeyman level. There is no period manual anywhere that is going to say a sentence, anything reminiscent of take the cut to your thighs so you may strike him in the face.
Yeah, absolutely. They will never promote that.
But that is a core tenet to thought processing and fight planning in the SCA. I will bait the leg to take the head. And if my timing is off and you manage a strike to my thigh and I get the one to your face, I win, one and done. This, I'm not bleeding out of my femoral artery. I don't give a crap.
Actually, I'm going to take that back. There are manuals that have the same sentiment, but not quite in the same respect. Because if you start looking at, especially some of the 17th century German manuals, they're tournament fighting. They are only worried, some of them, they're only worried about cuts to the head.
Right.
They don't care about getting hit in the body. So they will talk about.
Because part of that is also because like a lot of the German school, academy, or not academy, what's the word? Fencing colleges or social fencing clubs, the guys who would go for the scars, they're not targets. It's not an honorable thing to cut at a man's hand or his leg when your objective is to get him in the face. So then your foot being in range doesn't matter as much as your hand or whatever. And there are some schools, in USD and unarmed self-defense in the Army, one of the instruction components of that was teaching people how to fight unarmed against someone who is armed. What do you do when your opponent has an edged weapon, a bayonet, a sharpened stick, a knife, and you got bare hands? How do you approach that fight? I'm going to tell you actual Army doctrine and what we train. This is stupid, but this is the Army guidelines. Stab yourself in the hand. Take your hand, your off non-dominant hand, and stick it on the knife. With the objective of driving the knife through the palm of your hand and trapping it in your hand, in your non-dominant hand, and then choke the guy. That's Army doctrine on how to fight a dude who he has a knife and you don't. That's stupid, but you'll live, he'll die. That's the victory condition.
The trade-off.
Yeah.
The victory condition is that's a dead dude and you got a hand wound. That's a win. We don't go quite that dumb. We are that dumb. We are pretty dumb.
SCA Rapier does it.
Yeah, SCA Rapier.
Yeah, we do.
SCA Rapier totally does it. You can lose it, but in armored and heavy combat, we don't. No. We don't allow hand blocks. And because it'd be dumb. I'll admit that I'm the dumbass that has tried to block a polearm shot to my head when I'm fighting with a polearm by reaching up and trying to palm the edge of the head. Done it, it's dumb, but I've done it.
All right, and this is Odette.
But our rule set specifically prohibits in armored target substitution, which is what that falls under. Rapier does it, and again, I'm not primarily speaking about this from a rapier fighter's point of view because I barely am one. Cut and thrust is more my jam and probably what I should be doing more, but armored where I started, and armored's kind of where my brain is stuck, so this is how I'm approaching this. Again, I don't believe for 1 second I'm creating anything out of whole cloth. I'm picking and choosing elements from different fighting schools and trying to boil them down to their base commonalities. And you're right, Desco. There is a pace trade-off and a timing trade-off for the different steps. From my approach, if the way I think about fighting, and again, I realize that a lot of this is colored because I am primarily a sword and buckler fighter, and my decisions have to be different than someone that has a 36-inch heater. And that my approach to this is a lot of it because of my personality and my background. My goal in a fight is to stand at the teetering point of both your reach and range and my reach and range and bait you into making a mistake or take advantage of you crossing across that line. Does that make sense?
And that's like every fencing doctrine is stand just outside of measure.
Right.
Wait for them to do something dumb and make them pay for it.
Yeah. But one of my goals here is that in armored combat, when we have the discussion about measure, 85 to 95% of the time, that conversation does not begin until we're already in reach. Nobody really deals with or trains with the conversation about, you learn this through the school of hard knocks. You learn to stand the hell out of sword length and wait for your opportunity. But if you watch a lot of armored, I'm not saying all, but I'm saying a larger than minority average, those fights happen inside reach. And once people close to reach, they stay there. They come in and it just becomes timing work.
It's not enough about the transition to get from the movement to connect
goal
the fight.
should always be to be out of reach, go in reach with a plan, execute the plan, success or failure, get the hell out. Sometimes that plan is, I'm going to bind you until I find a better way to get out of here, right? But too often we have, and again, this is mostly, I'm looking at this from a training standpoint, I want to stop using A, B, and C. I want to outlaw the A, B, C discussion when we talk about measure in armored combat, because it makes me crazy. Because A, B, and C literally mean nothing. They don't have intrinsic definitions, and your A and his A and that guy's A could be completely inverse. A can be way the hell out there outside of reach, or A could be we're nose to nose mumping each other, right? That A doesn't tell me anything. A, B, and C require redefinition in every conversation. Reach is an intrinsic definition. If I can reach you, I can reach you. If I can't reach you, I'm in range. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, all right, Desco, wow, everybody, give me the Italian versions of those words. I know they exist, but I can't say them.
Misura larga is out of range. Misura is where I can hit you with a step. Misura stretta is where I can hit you with just time of the hand. And Misura strettissima is where we are in each other's shorts.
Right. So again, I don't take away the concept that reach is a fixed thing, that once you're in reach, there's no variation between the very outside edge of reach and we're going to come up and we're going to rub on each other's thighs. There are variances within all of that and different things you can do at different timings and different paces well within that arc. But the key lesson from the foundation of this is understanding that reach is an arc that you need to be outside of. Too many people approach armored combat. We have to close to reach and stay there and then fight inside each other's arcs. Please, 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 for the love of all that is holy, stop frickin' doing that. That makes sense to everybody?
Yep.
Anybody else got a comment or feedback? And I love the library background.
I have a word feedback for you, Monster.
Please.
Reach needs as much of a definition as A, B, and C does much of the time.
Reach is reach. If I can reach you, you're in reach.
I don't think that you're going to find that people interpret that much better overall, especially new people.
For reach, can my weapon touch you?
Right. Can my weapon reach you?
At
Can
this
your
current
weapon-
moment without doing anything else.
Right.
Is that reach your arm? Is that reach your head? Because that's the problem I have with it when I try to tell people that.
That would be different.
They don't think they're in reach unless the sword can reach the guy's head.
But again, that's the levels of reach. If you can touch any part of them, they're in reach. There are subsets inside reach.
You just like A, B, and C, you need to define that to people because
Again,
people
the way people are using A, B, and C is instead of the terms that Desco just pronounced for us that I can't
Right.
say, which is and that really plays into the timing tree. There is at the outset of reach, at the tipping point between reach and range, really all of your actions are happening at foot speed. All of your hand actions don't really matter. All of
I
that's
am
happening.
just telling you that
I get you.
that I have talked to, I have to define the word reach for. It's not intrinsic to them.
I get what you're saying. What I'm saying is that A, B, and C can be terms we use if we all uniformly define them inside reach. A, B, and C is an attempt to talk about the different levels of reach.
Well, when Katie taught me C is out of reach.
Right. But when some people teach me C, they're talking about nut to nut, butt to butt, that's C. The Cadian's definition of C being outside of reach is actually uncommon in the SCA armored community. Most people start A being extreme reach, where I can, without doing anything, I can hit you. That's the beginning of A. B is a comfortable distance away where we have time. You know, you can throw a shot and I have time to block the shot. That's B. And C is we're hugging each other.
But we're still missing my whole point to your word reach, and that is, I find you still have to define it.
Well,
it's not intrinsic.
I see what you're saying, but understand that the way that I'm using it or trying to use it here, if I can't touch you with the weapon, we're not in reach. Once I can touch you with the weapon, then we're in reach. And there's lots of other versions. So like Cadian C range is range, not reach. I get what you're saying, and I understand how I think I understand how you're using it. Like what you're saying is just because I can reach this target.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying you still have to define the word. It's not intrinsic.
But aren't you going to have
You
to?
can't say reach and the person immediately knows what you mean.
Okay, I get what you're saying.
Okay, that was my only point, because you were saying you have to define A, B, and C. Well, you also have to define reach. Right.
What I'm using A, B. I'm saying we have to define A, B, and C in the concept of A doesn't have a meaning to the word. It's kind of like you can't have a small and a medium, or a medium and a large. You have to have a small, a medium, and a large.
And yet we do all over the place now.
Right, but what I'm saying is those words are worthless. That's not what that word means. That's a sales thing. That's not actually a freaking word. That's just a mouth noise we made to make not the biggest one.
It's
So reach is a better word, but
large
it's
that is not
perfect.
currently present.
Yeah.
Right. Because you've got to have a medium to have a small and a large. Or you've got to have a small and a large to have a medium. You can have a small and a large without a medium, but you have to have a small and a large to have a medium. You can't have a medium and a large. Because then what you have is you have a small called the wrong word and a large. That's a poorly defined term. So maybe
And that's exactly what I was saying about using the word reach, is that it can become a poorly defined term if you don't, because just like you go to a place now and all you have are mediums and larges.
Or venti or whatever.
Small doesn't exist.
You use them.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is I think that the reason I'm going to discourage the use of A, B, and C in conversation, and the reason I'm not going to use it in my discussions, is because it has in it already most commonly an acceptance that we're already inside of reach, and it's useful. Where I see A, B, and C being useful is because the words that Desco said I can't say because I'm not that smart and I don't read that because my ADD brain sees a bunch of letters I don't know and go, nope, don't want it, and just move on. And I've relabeled it.
Oh, okay.
That makes sense. We do need, I don't really have terms, and maybe that's more advanced terms that we haven't gotten to yet, for the different levels of reach. But I think the core concept we have to talk about is weapons reach, weapons range, because weapons range is where I can't hit you with it right now because I can't reach you, but I'm still actively fighting you. Right? You understand what I'm saying? Because like our last pass at TOC, Suresh, neither one of us in those passes,
GS stuff.
more so the last pass, because I remember it still very clearly, we weren't inside each other's weapon reach, but we were putting pressure on each other and trading plans back and forth.
So would that just be like the head game space?
Right. That's your perception game. That's the lying. Well, okay, like Kellick. Let's go back to the brains for a second. I want to talk about a thing like the processing levels. You got your sentient, your monkey, and your lizard. Kellick gets me all the time with the shoulder fake. My sentient knows he's going to throw the shoulder fake and tries to tell my monkey, don't freaking fall for the shoulder fake. But Kellick has the ability to throw the shoulder fake just enough to bypass my sentient and get to my monkey. And my monkey goes, shoulder fake, and reacts while my sentient brain is going, no, it's a trick. You understand what I'm saying? You can short circuit the processing plan. I'm a veteran. There are certain things that make me do things that I don't have to think about. If you drop something around me, there's a pretty good chance I'm either going to go prone or fall behind something. That's not because my brain goes, what was that noise? Perhaps we should take cover. That's my monkey going, hi, instantly.
So what
Right?
you're saying is, this is Odette. When you were saying that your monkey says it's a shoulder fake. No, your monkey is saying that's really his shoulder moving to hit me.
Correct.
And your brain's like, it's a fake, it's a fake, it's a fake, and it's like, nope. Survival says we're
doing the thing. It's that thing where I'm doing the block on the monkey level while my sentient brain is going, damn it, right? Part of that can be overcome by training better at it and getting used to not falling for that. But a lot of it, like, not everybody can get me with that because they sell it at the right level to where my sentient brain has to process. I see what you're doing with the shoulder, and I tell the monkey, ignore that. That's a trick. When you do it just enough to where the sentient brain misses it, but the monkey catches it in the feed, that's when things go bad for me. And that's a good lie.
And that is what the best fighters are selling you, right? That's the lie they sell you. You know, the knights all know that they're lying, that once they've taught you to speak fighter language, then they go and lie to you in that fighter language. That's why people are harder to kill, because they don't know the language yet, and you can't mislead them yet.
All fighting is lying. The trick is learning what level to lie at and what lies to believe, disregard, and what lies to interpret as covers for other lies. This is where the mental game starts. And this is something very hard to talk about or train in a video series. You just kind of got to get smacked in the face a bunch, which is why we do actual sparring training.
Right. Now, good.
Go ahead.
All right. One of the things I wanted to say, but apparently my mic was not being cooperative, when we were talking about the thing that people kind of forget, and it's great that we are trying really hard in our heads to say this is sword fighting, but we are blunt force trauma fighting. All right. So all of these things that Tedesco is trying to say, that period manuals say this, and they do, but period manuals are assuming that we can cut each other. And what we are actually doing is hitting each other with blunt force trauma. That's why when you get good late period armor, when it works, right, it doesn't work in our game, right? Because it's doing what it's meant to do, which is stop blunt force trauma.
Correct. We're playing stick tack.
Hey, Monster.
Yeah.
In the chat, I posted a really quick sketch of what I think you're talking about with range and reach.
Let me see if I can open this. What's it doing?
Hi, Gia.
And yes, I have it.
Is it letting me open this? How do I open this?
You should just be able to double click it.
Mine wants me to download it.
Yeah, mine wants me to download it too.
Hold
on.
Can you share it?
I've got it downloaded if you want me to share it, Chad.
Yeah, throw it up for me, please, Drew.
Sorry, I kind of have chicken scratch handwriting. Plus, it was really quick.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Yeah.
Close it.
Yeah, that's good.
And
Everybody
those-
got,
Those very closely mapped to, at least that image, to Missouri Larga is that I cannot get hit yet. And then ABC is Missouri Stretta, Missouri
right.
way too.
Right. And what I'm attempting to do here, again, and I'm not trying to say that I'm the smartest person, I got it all figured out, but what I'm trying to come up with is a set of vocabulary that's got better intrinsic definitions than A, B, and C, that are easier to discuss, and that once we have agreed upon those things, they don't change, as a way to discuss it that don't require us to speak Italian.
Sure, and using the Italian words for everything, the 16th century Italian words for everything is definitely going to confuse people who are coming in like, what the hell are they talking about?
Right.
To
And I'm
more
more than happy to have those conversations, but
Yeah.
I can't.
And those definitions, to Isha's point, do talk about the difference between step and hit, just hit, or way too close. And but it still doesn't talk about I can hit the hand, I can hit the head. Those now you're getting to a point of granularity that we just have to keep on adding more words.
Right. And a lot of that comes from what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to strip away a lot of stuff down to base commonality. Like we talked earlier in the biomechanics section class that some of you guys weren't here for, but I know some of you were. Did I mention at any point in that class the difference between the male and the female pelvis? Anybody who was in the first class?
No, you did not.
And
Sorry,
why
no.
do you-
Yeah.
Why did you think I didn't? I should have called this out, and I'm sorry I didn't. I'll go ahead and tell you.
Because you forgot?
No, because I forgot to tell you this little note. There is a sexual dimorphic difference between female pelvises and hips and male pelvises and hips. However, that delineation is too small to be applicable in the point at which we're having the conversation. It fundamentally does not affect how you walk.
So I'm kind of proof positive of that. It don't matter. I move the same way Monster does when I'm throwing a shot.
Right. Having a female pelvis does not intrinsically mean you have a completely different skeletal muscle structure than me. There are finite granulations in the difference, but most of that is related to soft organs that don't have anything to do with what you're hitting me with. Okay?
How does center of gravity, which is different between male and female, impact that as well?
Because that is not a male-female problem. That is a body type and size problem. Me versus Sabah is not got anything to do with the fact we both have penises. It's got to do with the fact that he's 7.5 foot tall and 3 feet deep. Okay? I'm not going to be able to move like Sabah. Siobhan is going to move differently than me because she's shorter, not because she's female. You take two people of the same average height, average build, average size, make all of those things the same and put them against each other. It doesn't matter male or female. What matters is leverages and distances, and those are changed by height and width, and like body type and conditioning. Those things matter more than gender. There is not a large enough physical difference between the genders that we exhibit as a species in our sexual dimorphism as to matter. Is there sexual dimorphism in humans? Absolutely. We have physical differences in the genders. Do they apply to the mechanical systems we use for SCA armored combat? Absolutely not. Does that make sense?
Do the differences in the tendons and wrist structures, is that just too small still to make?
It's too small of a granulation. It doesn't make as much difference as the fact that your arm is a foot shorter than mine, or that my conditioning is different than yours, or that I've trained and taught my tendon. A lot of that, what we perceive as sexual dimorphism in that tendon difference and range of motion difference, a lot of that is environmentally conditioned. That's an epigenetics problem. That's the fact that I have spent more time doing this thing with my hand than other people have. Anybody can sew. I can't thread a fucking needle, but I have the ability to learn the skill. I don't have the skill. Anybody can swing a club the same way that I do if they have my same physical build and structure.
Let me rephrase this then, Monster.
Go ahead, Odette.
If okay, let's assume if you stand me next to Diederik, there's obviously a foot height difference. However, my legs are almost as long as his are. All right. So my torso to leg ratio is significantly different than somebody who is like Vitus, who's my height, thereabout, right? How does that?
Because that's not an
Sexual genetic of the body.
right. That's not a sexual dimorphism trait. That's a physiological trait that it can be exhibited by both genders.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Who's talking?
I said, uh-huh.
Okay. So that's not so much a gender difference as it is a body type difference. You know, you've got your endomorphs, your exomorphs, all these different kind of body traits. You can exhibit all of those same traits irrespective of gender. There is a sexual dimorphism in our primary and secondary sexual characteristics. That is true. However, that has less impact on our skeletal muscular structure than your genotype, whether you're an endomorph, exomorph, those kinds of things. So I'm putting that
And then what your
aside.
body is trained to do through life.
Right. And what your body is conditioned to through habit or conditioning. So we're putting that away right now as far as the dimorphism and everything to deal with the commonality of the mechanical structures. Now, again, that commonality falls down when you get to somebody like my good friend Kevin Rominger I grew up with, who doesn't have a right hand. His arm ends at the elbow. So his arm is mechanically different than mine, but he doesn't blow the curve, he demonstrates the curve. There are always going to be people who are going to be your far outliers. I'm trying to base this discussion upon the rest of us, that if you graph us over time, we're all in the same part of the bell curve. You got your weirdos who are out there at the edges, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about us as an average human species. Just like there isn't any difference between what we classify as races, which aren't really races, it's just genetic diversity inside the same species. But somebody from an African descent is not going to have a radically different muscle and skeletal structure than someone from a European descent. We have some different physiological characteristics, but most of that is still within species average. That makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we are running out of time. We got about 2 minutes left. I can talk about this all friggin' day. So at this point, I'm going to ask, did any of this help anybody think about anything any way differently, or give you a different avenue?
Drew just texted you can go a little longer.
Okay. Well, I mean, I got nothing else to do. So I'm on freaking lockdown. So here we go.
You could talk all day. I find that hard to believe.
I know, it's a surprise, isn't it? You couldn't believe it. It's a true statement.
So I love to do sword and board as much as the next person, but I'm also very heavily a combat archer, as people know. And so I'd love to talk about how these terms get applied within that kind of a range difference.
To do that, my automatic response is I'm going to revert to pistol and rifle drill, because that's what I've been doing for the last couple of days in the woods, is shooting stuff. When you're dealing with a firearm or a projectile weapon, you have what is called your minimum operational range, i.e. the bolt's got to clear the bow. You have your normal operating range, which is the area in which I know I can hit a man-sized silhouette without any optics or assistance. And you have your maximum effective range, where I know if I put a rifle in a bench and remove everything except for the mechanical action of the projectile leaving the round or leaving the barrel, what its maximum range is. Okay? So, for an example, the 5.56 NATO round, again, I'm just using it as something I'm well versed in. The 5.56 NATO round has a minimum operational range of basically, it has to be out of battery, which means you have to have about an eighth of an inch of space between the end of the barrel, basically the length of the projectile, so it can leave the barrel and outgas. That's the minimum operational distance with a SCA heavy crossbow for armored combat. The bolt's got to leave the bow. That's your minimum operational range. Your comfortable or nominal operating range is wherever you can comfortably hit a target, right?
And that's going to be based on the individual, based on their own practices and
right.
Yeah.
And your maximum operational range is how far you can fling a bolt, right? That's disregarding right now the conversation that is difficult to have about CA, about what constitutes a light shot. Is there such a thing as a light shot with CA? In some scenarios, sure, there is. In some scenarios, if it touches you, you dead. That's the same thing with siege. If any part of a siege weapon hits you, you dead. Is that real? Is that a replication of real events? Absolutely not. If I'm sitting there and I got a polearm in my hand and an actual ballista hits the end of my glaive, does that do crap to me? No. But in some SCA conventions of combat, if it hits my glaive, am I down? Yeah, I'm dead. Go rest. You're muted, Siobhan. I see you talking, but I can't hear you.
No, I'm just basically nodding my head in agreement. I'm thinking the main difference here being that unlike standard heavy weapons of your range being determined in part by the physicality of the person, at that point it becomes your minimum, your middle ground, your optimal, what was it? Optimal effective range
Right.
is going to depend more on the person's training, more so than their physical body and their equipment.
Right.
Because
Right.
My personal optimal range is probably going to be greater than a lot of people. Because
it'd be longer than mine if I picked up a crossbow right now and tried to shoot somebody.
Yeah.
Because although I'm CA authorized, I've only done it like 4 times in my entire life.
Yeah.
And I generally fling a bolt that way.
It goes that way.
Yeah, hopefully.
And SCA-Combat still has a bit of that, what your training range is, because, I mean, it's less so, it is super important with combat archery. But I'm going to pick on Ish again, because while he has monkey arms, he has trained that very far range. That is what he trains.
Right. And
he'll kill me at close range too, but.
Right.
And because just the existence of monkey arms doesn't mean that they can actually hit you properly at that extreme monkey arm range.
Right. We haven't even got into like the next part of the discussion I want to have is I'm sure Desco and a few other people recognize what that is back there. You know, into the different kinds of cuts and their functionality and form from different ranges. Like it is pretty hard when we're belly to belly to do a 3 or a 4 cut, to cut from down here up or down here up. It's a hell of a lot easier to cut 1, 2, 7 because, you know, but that changes what 1 is or 2 is. Rather than being me wanting to progress the tip to you, it's basically me trying not to punch you in the face with the basket, but getting really close. Because we haven't even got into how sword mechanics go. All right, now please visit the webpage on Facebook for the SCA S.M.A.C Talk and give me feedback. Feel free to send me notes and rants and screams at me, however you want to do it. But I want feedback and I need something to do. Thank you again.